It was 6:17 a.m. when I saw the gate. Not my usual wooden fence. Not the white panels I painted with my kids last summer. Number an industrial-grade keyless steel gate, bolted into the ground, framing the edge of my backyard like it belonged to a military compound. And the strangest part? There was no lock on my side, no keypad, no hinge, nothing. Just cold, matte steel where my fence used to be. I stood there in my slippers, holding a coffee I hadn't yet sipped, staring at it like it was a hallucination. Then I saw the sign. A laminated HOA-issued tag zip-tied to the metal frame. Property Access Optimization in effect. Section 14C. And that's when I realized something wasn't just wrong. Something was being hidden. I didn't call anyone right away, because I already knew who did it. Karen Matheson, the new HOA vice president with a god complex and a clipboard. The same woman who fined my neighbor $75 for a decorative lawn gnome facing the wrong cardinal direction. She'd made it clear for months, my fence interrupted the community's visual harmony. I thought she meant she didn't like the color. Turns out she meant it literally. They didn't just take my fence, they replaced it with a door. To something. I tried to open it, pushed, pulled, looked for a mechanism, nothing. The gate didn't even rattle. That's when I noticed the dirt. It had been freshly packed around the base. Not just disturbed, but repacked, almost like it was hiding recent excavation. And then it hit me. 2 weeks earlier, I'd seen a flatbed truck parked outside the HOA office, marked with a logo I didn't recognize. Armitage Subsurface Solutions. I'd thought they were laying fiber optic cables. But now, I wasn't so sure. That same afternoon, I went down to the HOA office. Karen was there, sitting behind the front desk like she owned the air in the room. "I need to talk about the gate," I said. "In my yard." She looked up, blinked once, and said, "Access optimization." "That's not an answer." She tapped her clipboard. "It's a shared utility gate, fully compliant with the revised easement guidelines. The vote passed last month." "I didn't vote on anything." She smiled. "Well, perhaps you should have attended the emergency quorum." "It was posted where?" I asked. She didn't answer. Just flipped the page on her clipboard and muttered, "Next." That night, I went online, searched for Armitage Subsurface Solutions. No website, no phone number, no business license registered with the state. Just one archived news article from 2009 about a defunct Cold War-era government contractor with the same name, formerly contracted to design fallout shelters across the Midwest. And that's when the chills started. Not fear. Memory. Because beneath my backyard, I remembered what my grandfather told me as a kid. "There's a room under this land, boy. We never used it, but it was built by men who wore badges but didn't have names." He thought it was just a storm cellar. But now, I wasn't so sure. The next morning, I started digging. Not at the gate, they'd poured concrete around the base, but 6 feet to the left, where the original fence posts had once been. And 2 hours in, I found it. Not a bunker. Not yet. But a hatch. Rusty. Iron. Round. Hidden beneath a slab of sod that had been laid no more than a week ago. There was a number etched into the handle. S Delta 57. It wasn't random. It was military. I didn't open it. Not yet. I needed proof. I needed help. So I called the one person who might know something. My Uncle Ray. A retired Army engineer who hadn't spoken to Karen since she ticketed him for an unauthorized American flag orientation on Memorial Day. He picked up on the second ring. "You found it, didn't you?" he said. "Found what?" I asked. But deep down, I already knew. Ray drove out that same day. Didn't even ask for directions. Said he remembered every inch of this property from 1982, back when my grandfather handed him the keys to the tool shed and whispered, "Don't ever let anyone cover that thing up." We stood there, both staring at the hatch, like it might whisper back. Ray finally spoke. This was part of a federal continuity project, decommissioned in the 90s, or so they claimed. Every shelter had a signature lock. You know what that means? I nodded. The key. The brass one hanging on the wall inside my garage. labeled simply, "Old shed, do not remove." He handed me a flashlight. "You ready?" I hesitated, because the gate wasn't the problem anymore. It was what they were guarding underneath. I slipped the brass key into the hatch. It didn't slide in. It clicked. Like the lock had been waiting for it. The kind of click you don't forget once you've heard it. Ray stepped back, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. "If it opens, we don't touch anything until we see what we're dealing with." I turned the key. It rotated smoother than I expected. A soft hiss escaped from the seal. Then, silence. Together, we pulled the hatch open. What we found wasn't a dirt hole or a storm shelter. It was a stairwell, cement-lined, dry, still lit. There was power. At the bottom of the staircase, a thick steel door stood waiting, painted white with red lettering. "Authorized access only. Federal property." Ray muttered. I knew it. There was no turning back now. He grabbed a crowbar from the truck. I held the flashlight. We descended slowly, the silence pressing on us like water in a deep ocean. At the bottom, he tested the door, and to our surprise, it creaked open. Not locked, not jammed. It opened into a narrow corridor. Old military signage lined the walls. Decades of dust. Emergency rations. A radio station map from the 1960s. But what stopped us in our tracks was the sound. A faint humming. Mechanical. Rhythmic. "Someone's still using this place," Ray whispered. I aimed the flashlight down the corridor, and then I saw them. Security cameras. New. Not military issue. HOA brand. The same model they used in the community gym. "Karen's been down here," I said. We explored deeper, slowly, carefully. At the end of the hall was a door labeled Sub-Level A. It had been pried open recently. Scrape marks on the floor. The hinges were polished, unlike the rest of the shelter. Inside was something we never expected. Rows of file cabinets, a makeshift desk, a scanner, and a box labeled Property Transfer Authorizations. Ray opened one drawer. "Holy hell," he breathed. Inside were photocopies of neighborhood title deeds, parcel maps, zoning overlays. But they weren't just archived. They were annotated, marked with colored stickers, dates, names. "Karen's been cataloging the entire neighborhood down here," I said, flipping through the folders. "She's tracking ownership transfers, some of them not even public yet." Ray pulled out a file labeled Phase 2 Implementation. Inside was a printed plan for something called Community Reorientation Strategy. With a bold header. Projected completion date, Q4. Full transfer of strategic lots. "Strategic lots?" I asked. "What does that even mean?" Ray didn't answer. He was staring at the map pinned to the wall. A large aerial view of the neighborhood, with red circles around certain properties, mine included. "She's not just running an HOA," Ray said. "She's managing a land acquisition plan." We took photos. Every page, every marker. I pocketed 2 files I recognized. One labeled Holden, Fence Violation, and another labeled Targeted Resident List. My name was highlighted. So were a dozen others. But just as we turned to leave, the corridor lights flickered. Then we heard it. The creak of footsteps above. Someone had opened the hatch. We froze. Ray turned off the flashlight. I ducked behind a cabinet. The steps came closer. Slow. Methodical. And then... silence. Not the comforting kind. The kind that tells you you're not alone. Ray mouthed, "Camera feed." We had to move. We waited. 30 seconds. Nothing. Then bolted. Back through the hall. Up the stairs. Out the hatch. We slammed it shut and threw a bag of garden mulch over it. Just in time. Because as we backed into my garage, a black SUV turned the corner and slowed in front of my house. Windows tinted. License plate unregistered. It didn't stop. Just paused. Long enough to make its presence known. Then rolled away. Ray exhaled. They know we know. That night I couldn't sleep. Not because of fear, but because of the implications. That steel gate in my backyard? It wasn't about aesthetics. It was an access point. And somehow, The HOA had turned a forgotten Cold War shelter into their control room. Ray said we needed to go public. I said we needed more proof. Because we weren't dealing with bad management anymore. We were dealing with an operation, and we'd just broken into its headquarters. The next morning, I found a letter taped to my garage. Not in the mailbox. Not delivered like the usual HOA junk. Taped. Center of the door. Bold red ink. You have been notified. That was it. No return address, no date, no signature. Just those 4 words, underlined with what looked like permanent marker. Ray was already at my house when I found it. He held it up to the light. Karen's getting sloppy. No, I said. She's getting scared. We had spent the night organizing the photos from the bunker. Every map, every document, every bit of proof that this thing went way deeper than a fence violation. We were going to scan it all, upload it to a secure drive, and send it to a contact Ray had at the local news station. But now, the warning changed everything. This isn't just about exposure, Ray said. It's about control. If she's threatening you without protocol, she's losing her grip. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. Something was off. At 2:11 p.m., I got a call from Claire. She lived 4 houses down, used to be friendly, used to smile and wave. She never called me. Hey, she said, voice low. I probably shouldn't even be calling, but you need to know. She paused. Someone from the board came by this morning. Said you were circulating false property claims. Said if I supported you, my garden variance might get re-reviewed. I blinked. Claire, what are you talking about? I'm saying, they're leaning on people, quietly. They said there's going to be a hearing, an emergency one, about you. Click. She hung up before I could respond. Ray was already pacing by the kitchen window. They're building a case. What kind of case? I asked. We haven't even published anything yet. He didn't answer. He just pointed toward the street. Karen was walking her dog, the one she always used to pretend she picked up after. But this time she wasn't alone. 3 other board members followed behind her. Not talking, not smiling, just present, like shadows. It was a show of force. Ray reached into his bag and pulled out a manila envelope. We're not waiting anymore. Inside were 5 printed pages. Summaries of the bunker, the files, the fake citations, everything we'd found. At the top of each page, unauthorized use of emergency infrastructure, Exhibit A. We dropped these to 3 people, he said. The city clerk, the local journalist, and someone inside the HOA who hasn't turned rotten yet. You trust anyone on that board? Ray didn't hesitate. I trust Megan. Megan Brown. Assistant HOA secretary. New to the neighborhood. Moved in with her husband and 2 kids less than a year ago. Soft-spoken, organized, always seemed a little too quiet during meetings. She's the one who flagged the landscape lighting tax last quarter, Ray reminded me. Caught a $9,000 discrepancy before they buried it. She's been trying to push back, quietly. So we took a risk. We slid the envelope into her mailbox at 9:07 p.m., after the streetlights had come on. No cameras, no headlights. Just a clean drop and a silent hope. The next morning, I had a voicemail. Mr. Holden. Megan's voice trembled. We need to talk, not over the phone. I met her at the back of the neighborhood library, the one corner they hadn't wired with HOA surveillance yet. She looked pale, eyes darting, clutching the envelope like it might explode. Do you know what this is? She asked, voice barely audible. Yes. No, she said. I don't think you do. She pulled out one sheet and tapped it. This map, this one here. The circled properties? These are the elevated risk parcels Karen referenced last spring. I thought she was bluffing. But these notes match the draft she accidentally emailed to me during a planning session. I leaned in. What risk? Megan looked at me like I had no idea what I'd stepped into. Holden. Karen's not just trying to rezone the neighborhood. She's trying to convert it into a private governance zone. A what? She wants to file for administrative autonomy under a charter district clause. If she gets it approved, she can strip down local oversight and replace it with third-party governance contracts. No city inspections. No public records. Just control. My blood froze. She's turning this place into her own municipality, I whispered. And she's halfway there, Megan said. But the one thing she needs to finalize it is no opposition. That's why you're target number 1. Before I could respond, her phone buzzed. She checked it, and all the color drained from her face. She knows I met with you, she said. I have to go. I tried to stop her, but she was already out the door. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just some rogue HOA president hungry for power. This was a woman who had found a legal way to consolidate it, and was systematically eliminating anyone in her path. Ray and I regrouped at my house. This is it, I told him. We're sitting on evidence that Karen is trying to privatize the neighborhood through shell contracts and zoning loopholes. He nodded. Then we stop playing defense, he said. We go on offense. That night we drafted a report, clean, factual, concise, and scheduled a meeting with an investigative team from the County Oversight Committee. But before we could send it off, my power went out. Not the block. Just my house. And taped to my door, again in red ink, was another note. Final warning. Some fences were built for a reason. I spent the night in the dark, literally. No lights, no heat, no Wi-Fi. The HOA claimed it was routine maintenance on the grid. Funny how it was just my house. Ray showed up around 7 a.m. with coffee and a portable battery. He didn't say much, just handed me a thumb drive. What's this? I asked. Back door into the HOA archives, he replied. Megan sent it, said if you wanted to understand what Karen's really building, you'd have to go further back. How far back? Karen hadn't replaced my fence with a gate. She'd replaced my freedom with a corridor. And I was done walking it. I didn't sleep. Not because I was afraid, because I couldn't stop thinking. About the files, the bunker, the surveillance tags, and the fact that while I was fighting over a fence, Karen had been building something beneath us. A system that tracked, measured, and labeled everyone in Magnolia Falls. The morning came in slowly, gray and heavy. Ray and I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the drive. We can't just post it, he said. She'll say it's doctored. She'll sue. She'll retaliate. He was right. We needed more than screenshots. We needed witnesses. By noon, I had my list. Alicia, who had been fined for decorative lawn imbalances. Mr. Granger, whose recycling bins were flagged as hazardous after he spoke out last year. Even Vanessa, the soft-spoken high school teacher, who received 2 violation notices for doorbell camera intrusion. Each of them had been profiled in those logs. Each had a file, and each was willing to talk. I didn't host a meeting. That was too easy to spin. Instead, I started an anonymous email thread. Encrypted, burner-based, off-grid. I called it Bunkergate, Truth Beneath the Grass. Every message was verified. Every participant shared something, a document, a memory, a digital footprint. Within 24 hours, we had 19 members. Karen didn't know it yet, but her quiet kingdom was cracking. Ray and I edited a clip. Not to go viral, not for drama, but for proof. A 3-minute walkthrough of the server room, with voiceover and timestamps, ending on the line, "You are not just residents. You are data points, and they've been watching." I sent it to one person, Dana Chen, the same local journalist who'd torn down another HOA's secret bookkeeping last spring. She replied within the hour. "I'm in. I want everything. Documents, testimonies, site access. I'll run it, but we do it right. Names sealed until confirmed. Facts only. No conspiracy fluff." It was perfect, because we didn't need drama. The truth was enough. That night, Ray parked his truck across from the rec center and watched Karen host her community recalibration briefing. She wore her usual beige jacket, pearls, the same tired grin. But her eyes darted more than usual. She was nervous. She knew something was off. The crowd was smaller than usual. Not because no one cared, Because they were elsewhere, with us, reading emails, watching footage, asking questions. And by dawn, the storm had landed. Dana's article went live at 6:47 a.m. Title: Magnolia HOA linked to underground surveillance bunker. Residents allegedly tracked without consent. Subhead: Declassified shelter logs reveal behavioral ranking system, hidden companies tied to HOA president. It hit like a hammer. Local Reddit lit up. Facebook exploded. Even the city council account retweeted it with the word, disturbing. Karen's silence lasted less than 5 hours. At 11:12 a.m., a message appeared on the HOA portal. All allegations regarding surveillance infrastructure are categorically false. The so-called bunker is a defunct Cold War relic with no operational relevance. Claims of resident tracking are exaggerated and misrepresented. Classic Karen: deflect, deny, degrade. But this time, it didn't work. Because within minutes, the screenshots flooded in. Dozens of residents posted their tagged profiles, lifted straight from the drive. Subject 211. Needs watch. Prone to social friction. Subject 088. Spouse may be susceptible to neighbor influence. Subject 027. Engaged in organized questioning behavior. The logs spoke for themselves. Karen hadn't just tracked residents, she'd assessed their psychology and tried to manage their reactions. We didn't have to fight her narrative anymore. She'd built our proof. And now it was everywhere. Even city officials weighed in. A council rep posted, "Residents of Magnolia Falls, we are reviewing serious allegations against HOA leadership. Civilian oversight and digital rights are not optional. We stand with transparency." Karen tried to pivot. She scheduled an emergency meeting, called it a crisis clarification session. She sent letters, filed noise complaints, claimed the footage was illegal, but it didn't matter, because we weren't afraid anymore. That evening, we gathered, not in secret, in the open, in front of the rec center, where Karen once gave speeches behind closed doors. We brought laptops, printed logs, even a projector. We called it the public debrief. Over 50 residents came. Alicia read the line that cracked the room. Subject 312. Violation prone. Consider strategic removal through policy attrition. That was her. Karen had used HOA violations not as compliance tools, but as weapons, against people, against anyone who asked questions. The final moment came when Ray held up the map, the red zone, the old shelter, the boundary overlays, and said, "She didn't protect us, she experimented on us." The silence was thunderous, and then, just as we ended the debrief, a single resident stood up. Mrs. Geller, 82, the oldest in our neighborhood. She clutched her cane and said, "I lived through the Cold War. I remember what it felt like to be watched. And I won't do it again. Not in my own home." That was it. The spell broke. Karen's kingdom wasn't just cracking, it was collapsing. But we weren't done yet. The bunker still stood. And there were rooms we hadn't opened. Secrets we hadn't touched. And if Karen had one final play left, it would be buried down there. Waiting. The door we hadn't opened was welded shut. Not locked. Not barricaded. Welded. The back corridor of the shelter led to a hallway Ray and I hadn't explored during our first visit. It was marked in the logs as Zone Red, Level 3 restricted access. No other part of the bunker had that designation. No camera tags, no lighting schedule, just 2 words, Karen only. We returned 2 days after the public debrief. This time, we weren't alone. Gerald brought tools, Alicia brought documentation, Dana brought a handheld mic and a small drone. We weren't just investigating, we were documenting history. The weld looked fresh, sloppier than the bunker's original clean lines. Karen had done this after the logs were leaked. It was a desperate move, and that made it dangerous. Ray took one look at the seam and muttered, "She didn't want this opened. At all." But we opened it anyway. The drone went first, ducking into the dark with infrared lighting. The feed came through a few seconds later. It wasn't a storage room. It was an archive. A long corridor with floor-to-ceiling shelves, most of them filled with folders, hard drives, and what looked like audio cassettes labeled by house number and date. The name at the top of the shelf? Resident Behavior Patterns, Phase 1. Ray stared at the feed, jaw tight. She didn't just track us, he whispered. She categorized us. The audio tapes were organized in sequence. Front porch conversations, driveway disputes, even neighborhood barbecues. She had been recording ambient audio, selectively, using old military-grade parabolic mics likely installed decades ago and reactivated without notice. Karen hadn't just watched us. She'd listened, analyzed, judged. We stepped inside. Carefully. I pulled one folder off the shelf. Mine. Inside, printed screenshots of my old HOA emails, flagged sentences, and even handwritten notes that read, "Pattern of low-level defiance. Uses humor to disarm. Do not escalate directly. Indirect citations preferred." It hit me harder than I expected. This wasn't policy. This was psychological warfare, and Karen had been running it alone, or nearly alone, from beneath our feet for years. Dana took photos. Alicia called the city inspector's office. Ray handed me an envelope he found at the end of the corridor, sealed in red wax with the HOA logo. Inside was a letter, dated 18 months ago, addressed to the Federal Department of Community Harmony, a program that had been quietly disbanded in the early 2000s. Karen had been trying to revive it, privately. She had pitched Magnolia Falls as a compliance model village. The words that chilled me most? Given time, residents can be adapted to prefer oversight. When they no longer notice the observation, they become ideal. She wasn't managing a neighborhood. She was testing a theory. By evening, the story went national. Dana's article, now updated with bunker footage and photos of the classified archive, hit the AP wire. News stations picked it up. Online forums lit up. HOA surveillance bunker shocks suburban town. Neighborhood president accused of weaponizing data. Fence dispute uncovers Cold War-era experiment in modern times. And Karen? She vanished. Not completely. Just enough to delay the warrant, but not enough to stop the county from freezing all HOA accounts and locking the rec center doors. Alicia led the emergency restructuring committee. Gerald became liaison to the city for compliance restoration. Ray and I? We returned the last folder to the archive and sealed it, not to bury it again, but to preserve it. As evidence. As a reminder. That silence isn't safety. That fences don't always protect. And that what looks like order can be the quietest kind of violence. 1 month later, the community met again. This time on the lawn beside the now demolished HOA office. There was no stage, no slogans, just neighbors. Tired, relieved. Together. Mrs. Geller brought apple pie. Aleph drew a chalk mural of a keyhole with people standing inside it, holding hands, and Alicia read the final clause of our new HOA charter. No resident shall be observed, analyzed, recorded, or profiled without full consent and transparent purpose. We do not serve systems, we serve one another. We cheered, not because we had won, but because we had ended it. The shadow presidency, the surveillance culture, the fear. Karen was later charged with misuse of federal records, civil rights violations, and municipal fraud. She pled not guilty, but we didn't need her confession. We had the truth. And sometimes, that's the only key you need. As I stood at the edge of the lawn, hands in my pockets, looking out at what we'd rebuilt, Ray turned to me and said, "She replaced your fence with a gate." I nodded. "Yeah. And you used it." "To walk through hell," I said, smiling, "and come out with everyone behind me." Because the real gate wasn't the one she installed. It was the one we opened together. To truth, to unity, and to a home that finally belonged to the people again.